Hello.
Bette Gordon might not be very well known here in Portugal because I don't think any of your films have been released. And so she's surprised if she belongs to the independent filmmakers that started to film in the 70s and 80s in New York. She's surprised in Cannes Film Festival with her film Variety that we will also see here in the festival in a new 35mm print. And tonight we are going to see her latest film. It's called The Drowning. Thank you for being here with us, Bette.
Well, thank you for having me. The only thing I'll tell you is a little story, which is actually not such a little story, but why I made this film is always a question that people ask me. And I had a very close friend of mine for many years who was murdered by her own son. He was 19 years old, and I was so completely devastated. He was a good kid. I watched him grow up. He seemed to love his mother, and so when this happened, I was desperate for an explanation. How could this happen? And I wanted to know. A friend of mine gave me a book to read called Border Crossing by a British award-winning author who's amazing named Pat Barker. She's written many novels, and this was a smaller novel of hers, and my friend said that I needed to read it. I thought that it would have the answer to my question, but of course, I think the question that I had, this need for an explanation of what could explain this kind of evil behavior, the answer to that was not necessarily found in the book, but at the same time, the question of the darker side of human nature and whether or not it can ever be explained, let alone treated by psychiatry or psychologists, I think as a culture where all of us are fascinated and also a little bit horrified by the dark side, by evil, but we're very drawn to it. Why is that? This stories about characters, whether they be cartoons like Darth Vader or real life people like The Making of a Murderer, all of the ways in which we are obsessed with the darker side of human nature, I think is something that really interests me. It scares me. It scares me a lot, especially at this moment in time, definitely in the United States, but I mean in other places too. And at the same time, it makes me want to look deeper and to see what that behavior, where it comes from, what it means, and then of course there's the unknowability of a crime that maybe you can never know, the enigma of the crime. So I think that we all are standing close to evil. Whether we cross over to the other side or not, that's a question. So that's the long version. There can even be a longer one as to why I made this film, but I thought I would tell you the medium-sized one. Okay, so if I'm still here and you're here and you have questions after, I would be happy to answer. Yeah, so I'm happy to do that.
At the end of the screening, we'll be here to
okay. All right, thanks. The film is dedicated to this friend of mine, and unfortunately, as I said, she was killed by her son, and the book was meant to help, but as you can see from the film, it didn't quite do that. It's as David Cronenberg said the other night, adapting a book is an effort that that you can never have in the book what you or you can't have in the book the same thing that you have in the film, and it's hard. It's hard to find a way to let go of some things and keep other things. And I love this author, and I didn't want to insult her, but I did change a lot of things, and there's that monologue that you have in the book of what's in Tom's head. So the biggest challenge of this film, and David didn't say this exactly, but I think that the work of a film is to take psychology and turn it into behavior. It's what you can see, behavior. It's no longer what somebody thinks, it's what they do. And for us, I think action is, you know, what moves a story forward. So, I mean, that doesn't mean shooting and jumping up and down. I mean, action can be a very kind of internal action. So that's the challenge, I think, of finding what's internal to a character and finding a way to get the behavior that corresponds.
Okay. When you cannot film thoughts.
No. Never, yeah.
The
yeah, and the actors is really interesting. I mean, working with Josh Charles, who some of you might have known from The Good Wife, which is a series on television. He's a great person to work with, and he started off, you know, in Dead Poets Society. He's been acting for a long time, so he was a really great collaborator. I mean, we took a lot of things, and we even went farther. So, for example, the scene where Danny forces Tom to hold a chicken. That's not in the book at all. There's nothing like that in the book. But the whole idea is that psychiatrists often sit back and listen to people talk about this sort of life that they had, and they don't feel it. You know, he's basically saying, you want to know what it feels like? This is what it feels like. So we invented that. The writer, who is really Frank Pugliese, who is the writer of House of Cards, the television series as well. So he and Josh are friends, and we got together and we kind of came up with that and a few other things too, especially the ending, which is not the ending of the book. And it's so interesting. Yes, it begins with water, and we thought we could call it The Drowning because the name of the book is Border Crossing, but everybody thought that our movie would be about borders, as in immigration and you know, the refugees, etc. So when she wrote the book, that's, you know, a different time period. So we changed it, but we knew that people would think, oh, The Drowning, it happens in the beginning, and wouldn't expect the end. In the end of Pat Barker's book, really we find him, you know, kind of the wool has been pulled over his eyes. Danny says everything that he says, and then he walks away, leaving Tom standing there yet again. And a lot of early readers of my screenplay said, you mean you're going to take us through all of that and you're not going to let us have any satisfaction? And I've made other films with a kind of ambiguity, which I love, that doesn't kind of finish off what you start. And I've always loved that. I mean, my film Variety, of course, does that. Other filmmakers whose work I love, Antonioni for sure, you know, certainly play with that idea. But I thought this time I would take a risk and go farther than I'd gone before and find an ending. And because we are so tired of Tom having to deal with a man who is going to haunt him forever, I used to call it the ghost of Danny. He'll never go away. I mean, what do? How do you exorcise, you know, somebody or something from your life? You know, you have to kill it, either metaphorically, really, you know, he just had to do it. So I decided to go that far. And I sent the movie when it was finished to Pat Barker, the author, and I was petrified because I changed her ending. And I love that she wrote me and she said, this is perfect. I love your ending. I love everything you did. After that, I thought, I don't care. I have given her, you know, sort of an interpretation of her book. Not her book, but an interpretation of her book. And she was happy, so I was happy.
Questions from the audience?
Well, it's certainly one of those. I love thrillers. I mean, I grew up on Hitchcock, and for me, there's no better psychological terror than a Hitchcock film, and I can see them over and over again and continue to learn. I think he's a master storyteller who has often said that a film should be understandable to any audience, even if it's dubbed into another language that the audience doesn't speak, because film is really this shot-to-shot relationship that I think needs to tell that story visually, and I try to do that in my work, but all the other components of filmmaking only enhance and add to that and add another voice. Certainly the sound design is something that I love to work with, and I work with a composer named Anton Sanko, who is a great, he used to be with Suzanne Vega, and he's just a great guitar player and now a great composer, so we have a lot of fun working together. And the voice, in a way, of the film, I mean, it's a combination of Chinatown and you know, so many other sort of memories of music that sort of put us in a mood and make us feel something, and then the threat that, you know, sort of builds and builds. And thrillers are something also that I realized a lot of female directors have not handled. Horror, yes, I think more and more women are embracing horror in order to kind of say something very specific, but the genre itself, I can count on a hand of women directors who have really, you know, played with that or embraced it. Jane Campion certainly in The Cut, Claire Denis in Intruder, I think. Ida Lupino from the 1940s, one of the few women to direct in Hollywood during the studio era, who was an actress, but made a movie called Hitchhiker, which is a thriller. Not that many. I mean, after that, maybe Susanne Bier, a Danish director. Do you know her work? So, I mean, really, when you think about it, so many men, every male director is, at one time or another, wanted to try this genre. So I just wanted to see what it would be for me. And I remember the New York Times review that came out said, finally, a psychological thriller that's really about psychology. So I thought, yeah, okay. Yeah. So anyway, that was very satisfying. But I think, you know, the idea of what's underneath the water is always fascinating to people. I mean, we like that which lives beneath, you know, and you know, the murkiness of human nature. It's just so messy and it's so unexplainable, and somehow, you know, that metaphor of the darkness underneath the water was perfect. Irene?
I have a question. Well, you know, if I see a movie about musicians, I think I bring a different kind of critique or something to it. So have you had any particular feedback from people who are in the field of child psychology? Was that, I'm curious how they weighed in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's disturbing, but they've weighed in, you know, in saying that, you know, there's something accurate about the inability sometimes to really use this idea of looking into the past and my father, and, you know, that finally there's something, you know, in some cases, not all cases, that's just human nature, or just nature in and of itself. You know, the story of the scorpion and the frog, in which the scorpion basically needs to get across the water, and he convinces the frog to take him across the water because there's no other way to do it. But the frog says, yeah, but if I take you, you're going to sting me, and I'll die, and you'll die, and it's crazy. I mean, and he said, look, I'm not going to do that, because if I do, I'm going to die, and I don't want to die. And he gets across the water halfway, and the Scorpio stings the frog. They die, and the last, you know, question is, but why did you do it? And he says, it's in my nature. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, you know, and also the idea, I think, that I wanted to put forth to psychology in that way. I mean, look at characters in the world. Look at Donald Trump. Look at some people. No matter what we think, we just can't explain. And crime in and of itself is sometimes, there's not any. No matter how many explanations we give, none of them are satisfactory. And so it's that unknowability of things.
And the
really
ambiguity of his character. I think that ambiguity is always...
And it's disturbing because we as a culture want to, you know, we really want to understand and find explanations, but what if there is none? That's what I said to myself. What if one cannot explain?
His father was complicated.
Yeah, and you can't, you know, and even that, and even his father said, this kid's bad, you know, like, you know it and I know it, and what does bad mean? So, I don't mean it in the sort of most...
bad and good.
Yes, and yet we root for him. I mean, that's what fascinated me when I read the book. I was praying that Danny really didn't do it. You know, I liked him so much as a character that I really wanted him to be innocent. And even when I think, okay, he's done it, I still want to be on his side. And that's really, like, you know, a very disturbing way in which we sometimes have people in our lives that, you know, are master manipulators.
I have a question. In the book, does he plays about the son, the baby that is supposed to be born? Does he plays with him that way? Because that's where he risks everything.
Yes, where he says, "Oh my gosh, you're going to be a father." He's also playing with him there, and The question
but in the
is.
book it happens the same in the book,
Um,
or it's
No,
in the movie?
no, the book is different.
Ah,
The
okay.
book is different
Okay,
because
okay.
also in the book, early on, the wife leaves, and she, is really out of the
But
story.
at the moment I thought that.
Yeah.
That she might have
Yes, have
In
left,
the end,
yeah,
but
yeah.
close to the end.
And Julia and I really talked a lot about her character because in a traditional thriller, she would be victimized. She would be the one we worried about. But Julia and I wanted to create a strong character and also a woman who had her own secrets. And her secret is her ambition, and so her ambition is strong and she's going to follow it. And she loves Tom, but she doesn't need Tom. And she doesn't need to leave. The question that kind of comes out is, well, how do we know it's not Danny's baby?
Exactly.
In the book it isn't. In my mind it isn't. It's just another game. Yeah, but I don't answer
But
that
it
question.
was the last game you
Yes,
played.
yeah, the last game. The game in which, this Jekyll and Hyde, I mean, they're parts of each other, this duality of the rational Tom who wants to explain everything and the social, animalistic Danny who, really confronts Tom and says, I'm going to make you reveal your true nature to yourself. And is anybody capable, given, pushed far enough? How do we know what we would do? I think we don't know, and I don't think we'd have killers in war if we weren't capable of killing. So I just think there's a kind of
Even the chicken,
yes.
it's about being able to kill.
Yes. I mean, we kill animals. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of really good things in her book, and she probably is gentler. It's a psychological thriller. Her book is a thriller, but I think mine is a little tougher. And she, she was fine with that. And the book allows you to have more philosophy. As David was saying, what he misses is philosophy, and in a way, you have to find another method of making people think about the philosophical question of murder or crime or what can happen between two people given one being pushed far enough, or what would you do if ... and you never know until you do it, right? Behavior is a funny thing.
I have just a final remark,
Yes.
which is I don't feel comfortable with terror films. I avoid them all the time.
Yes.
And but my husband said, let's go to see this one.
Oh.
And when it starts, I felt like, oh, this is terror. And he said, I don't feel comfortable. Okay,
Yes.
let's see. But there is a moment where I felt safe.
Ah,
Thank you.
interesting. Yes.
I knew that I would feel it, but without being frightened.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I would use my mind.
Yes.
I don't know what to explain this.
Yeah,
I don't know
that's-
if it's good or not. But
Yeah. I think that's good. Yeah, that
I felt safe.
you felt safe and you wanted to know what was going to happen,
So
but
everything,
but you didn't want to
I
run
felt
out.
innocent.
Okay,
Or-
good.
I don't
Well,
know,
because
I
I
felt
think
safe
it's
with you.
more about the way we think than it is about hurting or, that. Yeah, and I think a lot of thrillers, I mean, you think of David Fincher, I mean, look at Seven, for example. I mean, whoa, that's very, With Hitchcock, with Hitchcock, I often, even the shower scene, which I still am afraid to take showers sometimes by myself, but I still think, or Vertigo, the way in which behavior repeats itself, I find it fascinating. And I can't stay away, I'm drawn to it, in a way that I can't explain why I'm drawn to it. But I think we're animal creatures, and we already are born with being able to feel threat, and somehow that threat is familiar to us, and sometimes we go in the direction of the threat. How many times in horror movies, when we know that there's something in the basement and the character goes down there anyway, and we say, please don't go down, but they do. Yeah. So,
But
we all go
here,
down
I say,
there.
let's go.
Yes,
Let's face it.
But yeah, psychology is really more interesting to me than anything. Why people do what they do, which we so want to be able to explain, and yet perhaps it's just something we can never really know.
Lovely.
Good, thank you. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.